Thank you, everyone. We are very glad to have our guest speaker, Mr. Raveendran Selvadurai, who is joining us today from India, and he's there sitting in the car. I have gave handouts of his script that he's going to read for us today, but let me begin with a short introduction to his piece, his writing. So. Sri Lanka was an independent colony, like it's a separate from British Raj. So it's a colony on its own called the Pearl of Indian Ocean. It's very flourishing colony situated at the southernmost edge of the Indian subcontinent. The size is 25,000 square miles. Population 1981 was 15 million. So there are two linguistic groups. 74% of the population speak Sinhala, 26% speak Tamil. The Sinhalese population is overwhelmingly Buddhist. The Tamils are predominantly Hindus. And there is also substantial minority of Muslims, 8%, who speak Tamil, and Christians, 9.5%. Christians are both Sinhala speaking and Tamil speaking, so Sinhalese or Tamils. And before the colonial era, there were four kingdoms ruled by separate kings, and the rich island, the island rich of spices and germs. 1505, the Portuguese arrived and soon took control of the two of the Sinhalese kingdoms. So the remaining kingdom was one Sinhalese and the other Tamil. And the independent Tamil kingdom in the north was captured only in 1621 by Portuguese. And after the arrival of the Portuguese, like 150 years later, Dutch came and captured the coastal areas. So the two kingdoms, three kingdoms, sorry. And in 1796, the British took over these areas and the cinnamon industry. 1815, the British conquered the last remaining kingdom, the Central Highland, the Sinhalese Kandyan Kingdom, and subsequently brought the island under one administration in 1833. And this unification of the island by the British, some say, was the seed of the ethnic conflict in the island, and also perhaps prevented the development of the liberation from bondage of the so-called plantation Tamils by controlling their migration to Tamil areas, the north and east. So Tamils in Ceylon or Tamils in Sri Lanka, there are two separate Tamil community. Of course, there are other groups migrated later, but mainly these two we talk about, to address. One is the indigenous Tamils, Ceylon Tamils, Sri Lankan Tamils, who many of them live in the north and east. And 1981, the percentage in the population was 12.6%. And another group is the Tamils of the Indian origin. They live in the plantations in the south, 5.6% of the population. And as you see here, the Lipton's tea estate, the Tamils of Indian origin people were brought by Sir Lipton and others for plantation labor. So the plantations in the south are located, the slash areas in the south, these areas. Whereas when we say north and east, it's these north and eastern areas. In the north, there's a city and peninsula also called Jaffna. That's where the Mr. Raveendran Selvadurai is from. And Colombo is the capital city, not capital, the most populated business center of Sri Lanka. Okay, so the Indian plantation workers, the plantation Tamils of Indian origin, they were brought for the plantation work, coffee, tea, and rubber. The British planters brought them from South India as indentured labor to work in their plantation economy. The plantation economy has played a key role in the island's economy and bringing about 60 to 70% of the foreign exchange earnings. Very lucrative business. But despite all this, this group, Indian plantation workers, are the lowest income group, the most marginalized and discriminated group in the country. Um, And these Tamils in the north and east, so the indigenous Tamils, Ceylon Tamils, Sri Lankan Tamils, how we call them, whatever we call them, is almost the opposite. They are highly educated because the English medium schools, first in the English medium schools in Sri Lanka were concentrated in Jaffna. 1816, the American Ceylon Mission opened, the Telipalai, the Common Free School, first American-run common free school, now Union College in Jaffna, 1820, Uduville Girls College, that's in the photo, the first girls-only boarding school in Asia. 1823, another college in Wat Kottai, now Jaffna College. These teachers or missionaries are coming from Ivy Leagues from the US. They were building seminaries and thinking these young, bright Tamil boys will become the Christian ministers. Anyway, so in 1848, the Green Memorial Hospital in Manipai, the first medical school in Ceylon. So, excuse me, I cannot read the screen properly because anyway, so the British colonial rulers recruited many these indigenous Tamils to public service, recognizing their skills and performance, not only say in Ceylon, but in other parts of Asia where the British went, Malaysia, Singapore. Okay. And the post-independence era is independence 1 year after India, 1948. The successive governments who are predominantly Sinhalese controlled because they are 70+% of the population, imposed policies by legal enactments that were discriminatory to the Tamils relating to these areas: language, religion, education, government service, colonization schemes, and development programs. For example, in 1948, more than 1 million Indian origin Tamils, these plantation workers, were disenfranchised and made stateless. This reduced the voting power of the Tamils in the legislature from 33% to 20%. In 1956, Sinhala language was made the only official language, and regulations made for the use of the Tamil language were never implemented due to protests from Buddhist monks and opposition groups. So the Sinhala became the official language. 1972 Constitution did away with the safeguards given to certain rights of the minorities by the Salisbury Constitution at independence in 1948. B, confirmed the Sinhala language as the official language. And C, Buddhism was given the foremost place in the Constitution. So as you see, the language, and with that comes education, then the religion and the rights of the minority groups were legally restricted. So policies by legal enactments that discriminated Tamils have been implemented. And the grievance of Tamils, unemployment, that's the biggest thing among the Tamil youth, began increasing as a result of these measures. The Sinhala Only Act, 1956, that Language Act, the Sinhala became a compulsory requirement for government service even in Tamil areas. In 1970, a scheme of medium-wise standardization, so the language of instruction-wise standardization, under which a Tamil medium student was expected to score higher marks than a Sinhalese student to enter higher education. And later on in 1974, a district quota system, which continued to affect Tamil. So it became harder and difficult for the Tamil youth to get into universities. Then state-sponsored settlements of Sinhalese in the regions where Tamils lived traditionally, the north and east, with the purpose of changing demography content. There are many other things, but these are some of the major things that affected and made Tamil youth unemployed, jobless, and planned violence against the Tamils by mobs since 1956. 1956 is an important year in Southeast Asia and Buddhist Asia. That was 2500th anniversary of Buddha's birth. So Burma, Thailand, Sri Lanka, so-called Buddhist countries had a huge celebration. 1956, when the Sinhala-only Act was introduced, the peaceful protest of the Tamils was broken up by the Sinhalese mobs, while the police force watched from a distance. In 1958, in the aftermath of peaceful protest, more than 1,000 Tamils were killed. In March 1961, the government declared a state of emergency and dispatched troops to the northern and eastern provinces to break up a peaceful civil disobedience campaign. There are so many peaceful civil disobedience campaigns by Tamil leaders against this enactment, the policies of the government. In April 1974, the police attacked the civilians without warning during the 4th International Tamil Research Conference. It was an academic conference in Jaffna, which resulted in the death of 9 Tamils and injury to hundreds of others. And 1981, this was very significant for the Tamils, also for educated Sinhalese people. The burning of the Jaffna Library, approximately 90,000 books were reduced to ashes, and these books, also ancient scrolls and traditions of the Tamil people, were burned. 1981. So with all this background, in the background, demand for self-determination becomes crucial among the Tamil community. So in the 1970s, the Tamils increasingly supported the concept of a separate state of Tamil Elam. On 14th May 1976, the TULF, Tamil United Liberation Front, adopted a resolution for a separate state of Tamil Elam. It listed the following actions taken by the Sinhala majority against the Tamils. So these are what the TULF Tamil Party said against. 1, disenfranchisement of the Tamils of Indian origin. Sinhala Only Act, that's language. State-planned colonization in Tamil areas. Giving Buddhism the foremost place in the constitution, because Buddhist people are Sinhalese people. Discrimination against Tamils in education and employment. Permitting and unleashing communal violence against Tamils. And terrorizing, torturing, and imprisoning Tamils. And this party, TULF, became in 1977 an opposition party. So when in July and August 1977, after the general election in which the TULF won by an overwhelming majority for its demand for a separate state, so it did not become the leading party, but it became the major opposition. The next major outbreak of communal violence occurred. So this communal violence that occurred in 1977, over 1,500 deaths, that's what's called, is what our today's speaker, and who he is a lawyer, Raveendran Selvadurai, was looking into that time. And he was part of this commission called the Sansoni Commission of Inquiry, finding truth about what happened in 1977 violence. And he was part of the Tamil Refugees Rehabilitation Organization. The Tamil Refugees Rehabilitation Organization was founded in the midst of the communal violence that engulfed the country in August 1977 by certain individuals who found themselves involved in the task of saving the lives and properties of the people affected by this violence. And for these individuals soon banded themselves into an organization when they realized the enormity of the problem confronting them. So this is where our guest comes in too. And so he collected 10,000 testimonies. Okay. Okay, now proceed. 1983. So this is where the text and the of our lawyer Raveendran sir will comes. So Ravi sir, would you like to read your text? Is it legible?
Yes, it's reasonable because my writing. My appearance was needed with the senior counsel and a silk in the Colombo Supreme Court against a clampdown of a weekly newspaper, the Saturday Review, published from Jaffna, part of the traditional homeland and predominantly inhabited by Tamils. I must pause and tell you that at this moment, I had no interaction with the paper except to read it, and I was only simply instructed to fight against the clampdown as simply as a lawyer and nothing more. So, one of my drivers who travels daily from the outskirts of Colombo brought the news that there was violence in and around the cemetery on the border of the city with anti-Tamil slogans warning me that these would escalate and not to venture out. Another driver who lived in a suburb closer to me came with a warning that there is likelihood of violence and that I should not go to my office or to the court. But both of them were Sinhalese and loyal. The area around Vellavatha, a suburb with an abundance of Tamils, was apparently calm, unable to foresee the calamity that was to fall upon within the next few hours. There had been an air of anxiety and uneasiness due to the killing of 13 soldiers on the Sinhalese army in a roadside ambush by Tamil militants in the previous days, and in their bodies were cremated at the cemetery near Colombo. My need to be in court and the necessity of that application to be supported preoccupied me. There was no swift announcement of any control by curfew through the news, and the courts would then be sitting. So I had to attend to support that application. I requested one driver to stay at home with my family while I decided to go to court with the other driver, utilizing his taxi, which he used part-time. During the trip, for a few kilometers, there were young men traveling in vehicles with knives, clubs, and crowbars and iron rods, shouting anti-Tamil slogans, threatening violence and vendetta against Tamils. They were in vans, minibuses, and pickup trucks traveling in the direction of the predominantly Tamil suburbs. They were clearly organized groups and not known hooligans There was no spontaneity in their having got into these vehicles. Although concerned, I went a few kilometers only only to encounter a heavy traffic jam with vehicles stuck or unable to move. This was the Dali Road junction in Maradana, where I had to take a left turn to get to the courts. If we had time, and if you see Al Jazeera prepared one um, YouTube one after 40 years and remembering the violence, the scenes of such fire and destructions and hooligans roaming around in the street and burning Tamil people by pouring petrol could be seen. Tamils, unlucky to be findings, were mostly assaulted or hacked with knives, petrol poured on some of them, and being set alight with attackers blatantly celebrated such killings. Few of them, while stuck in the traffic jam, I myself had to witness. It was pandemonium, and we were concerned that if the gangs managed to get closer to our vehicle, my fate would also be sealed. In that calamity, I noticed the official vehicle of the Chief Justice has scrolled near my car in the parallel lane. It was before this very same Chief Justice that our application was to be heard. Amidst all the panic and violence around us, my driver decided he should make a U turn, narrowly missing the Chief Justice's car. Our eyes met, and by signs I made it known that I would not be in courts, and nor could he call me into his car to provide me some measure of safety. The point I wish to make is that we were familiar. He knew I was the lawyer who will be representing. He was Sinhalese and he was in an official vehicle. He could have simply transferred me into the car and protected me, but he also felt that he did not want to have trouble, and so he just avoided. And so I had to return at my best opportunity, because had I remained there and if the gangs have approached and opened my taxi door, there would have been no Raveendran to tell the story. While expressing those concerns, I walked into my home and mentioned the situation to my wife. It was confronting and worrying, with 3-year-old and a 6-month-old baby with immediate family in and around and nearby suburbs, and not knowing what had befallen them. While expressing these concerns to my wife from the balcony of our home, we saw a suburban train halting at an unscheduled stop, because the station, if the train is a routine train going towards, will be about 1 kilometer away from our house. Sinhalese youth alighted from the train carrying weapons, shouting anti-Tamil slogans and rushing towards the Tamil homes in the by roads next to the train tracks. These were not ordinary hooligans or criminal elements. Many were finely dressed. Some even spoke eloquent English, functioning around a leader who had a list directing the mob, pointing at the homes to be attacked. I realized that the train had been stopped in that spot through pre-planning to facilitate the group's easy access to the targeted homes, and particularly the Hindu Ramakrishna Mission with its library in that location. So the train was stopped particularly for that locality, um, allowing the group that was interested with the attack in that area to alight from the train. The mob, from about 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., this mob, together with additional ones converging them our streets, let loose its fiery anti-Tamil violence by destroying and burning properties, Tamils, and then moving to other streets. The mob tried to push through the gates to my home and had arguments with my driver and a few loyal Sinhalese neighbors about our homes and the identity of who lived within. Myself, my wife, and our children were hiding within the rooms. Silently, the driver argued that the owners of this home are also Sinhalese and they had gone to the market where he had dropped and them off, but having seen the commotion, he had brought the car home but would get back to collect his employers soon. Fortunately, our house was not yet on the list as owner of that home, as it had been purchased only a few months prior and was not yet listed in the municipal registers from where these mobs had collected some information. Even before the attack, which had killed 13 soldiers, my home has still listed as owned by a Muslim gentleman, and that is what this mob group did not have my house listed to be destroyed. My home was listed. That evening, following the destruction with embers and smokes of the burnt home out around us, we were frightened and haunted, but we had no option to leaving and had to continue to hide, not knowing what would happen to me, what would happen next. Mercy came from a Sinhalese neighbor. After the mob had departed from the area, my neighbor asked us to climb down onto the roof from the balcony in my backyard and then slip into the back garden. We had to keep awake, huddle in our neighbor's back room with our children kept quiet without any mourning. Early next morning, a prominent Sinhalese lawyer, a friend of mine who was the chairman of the government lake house, came looking for me, and an army reservist who himself was a lawyer. He took my family and I to his home for sanctuary until things settled. I used his vehicle and army reservist to look for my extended family. On reaching the property of my sister, where I had lived previously before moving to my new home, and with the address known to the intelligence, I realized bullet marks had shattered the glass windows, doors, and walls. I discovered that security forces arriving in a truck had shot at the home, damaging it while looking for me. But my sister and her family were managed to be saved and sent to an internally displaced persons camp opening at Ratmalana Airport. There were large numbers of Tamils from nearby areas, all of which were within the electorate of Mr. Lalitha Mudali, then Defense Minister, and a lawyer who was known to me and very friendly. He was there with his supporters and volunteers trying to put the camp into some shape, as many would have been his voters. He was a colleague and well known to me, and while talking of these events, he requested me to appease the people not to panic, as the violence would not further escalate because the blood of the Tamil tigers held in Velikada prison had been leached. My fellow Sinhalese inmates, which had satisfied burning vengeance of the Sinhalese soul. There was empathy in his voice. There was no empathy in his voice, and there was an endorsement of these brutal killings in the path of entreating Sinhalese supremacy. The Black July program, which was premeditated by the ruling UNP with extended support of mass violence by Sinhalese nationalist groups like the JVP, covering the entire country, targeting Sri Lankan as well as Indian Tamils with the estimated death toll varying from 400 to 5,400, with over 150,000 people being made homeless, with 18,000 homes and over 5,000 businesses destroyed. It was clear the pogrom was organized to destroy the economic base of the Tamils, and the loss estimated at 300 million, and drove the Tamils out of Sinhalese majority districts. In the report published in December 1983, the International Commission of Jurists described the violence as the pogrom of having amounted to acts of genocide. The violence gave impetus to a growth of Tamil militant movement, the war, and the final episode in Mulivakkal in 2009 amounting to genocidal proportions and the war crimes and crimes against humanity in the conduct of the war. Day-to-day events of violence and its accounts are available in the various reports of what happened to be communicated to the rest, but so far no one has faced any criminal indictment or prosecution. It is the continued arrogance not to pay attention to unlawfulness or violence against Tamils on ethnic grounds or previous violence with the political and executive protection not being even identified perpetrators that led to the Black July 93 violence and the subsequent event in the country. In that pattern and planned and organized violence of Black July 1983, the complaints of violence identified by Tamils which are aimed at identifying the causes and its perpetrators. To be a Tamil was one of the greatest misfortunes during the July 1983 and also in August, September 1977. But today, just by the events that led on and by the war in 2009, to be a Tamil is a not a great misfortune, but it will be a definite danger for his life, even as at today, by events that happen in the country. This is still the case today, even after the events of Mudivaikal in 2009. However, I did not get caught as a Tamil, but rather was specifically targeted for human rights activities on behalf of the affected Tamils in the 1977 violence. The steps we took to form the version of the Tamil Refugee Rehabilitation Organization, TRRO, detailed in the attached memorandum, the task of resettling the affected Tamils, mainly those displaced from the hill country, Anuradhapura, Kekirava, etc., in the Tamil border villages, mostly upset the authorities. The collection of statements from these affected and forming the requirements of the Inquiry Commission were undertaken by a team of volunteers with the TRRO guidance, and we researched for corroborative evidence which identified politicians, police, security personnel who were involved for investigators. Then we let the evidence and the public becoming alarmed. Steps were taken to safeguard them, and the 1983 program was planned to deliver any threat with genocidal efforts. The threats were extended to those involved with the commission and even targeted by officers and those few other councils who had records and manuscripts of proceedings of the commission. These officers, including my own, were targeted, satellite, and destroyed during Black July 1983. Prevention of Terrorism Act was enacted and then indemnity provided to persons within the security forces who will identify who, with events in 1977 and extending through the 1983, being immune from prosecution. The state having not taken any steps against forces responsible for the genocidal attacks in the war during the 2009 continues to defy the international community in bringing them to justice. I have attached the final memorandum we submitted to the Commission, and you have the Commission report as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So now we have time for the Al Jazeera video. So should I show it?
For the more impact in relation to what I narrated, that can be shown. Otherwise, if there are some questions into the development of the genocidal tendencies from the historical detail that you read, we can discuss that. But
Okay.
after the 83 violence, the Tamil youths became an organized as a liberation groups, and they started an armed struggle, which was to some extent encouraged by the Indian government for its regional superiority by training them and in order to bring down the government of Sri Lanka, which was liaising more with America and allowing superiority in the region. Now, in 1987, India forced a pact with the government and even sent its arms to throttle the liberation struggle. The Tamils fought with the Indian army, and the Indian army had to withdraw, and they continued their war on their own with the support of the expatriate Tamils and other forms of funding, which the government decided to quell on the basis declaring them as terrorists after the Twin Towers were burned down and America declared all political liberation groups involved in war to be terrorists. So war continued very strong after the Twin Tower burning on the basis of them being termed international terrorists, and the crush happened in 2009 where the Tigers were eliminated. Along with that, our records say more than 100,000 to 150,000 people were massacred just because they were around the area. And there were almost 18,000 youths were surrendered by their parents to the security forces on the basis that they will investigate about their links to the Tigers and release them. But what happened to them has not been known yet. 15 years has not known yet. Their fate is also not known. And there are still certain people are continued to be in custody, and nothing has been done in order to rehabilitate the remaining people or the remnants of the families who lost their beloved ones in that. That is what I was talking about, the 2009 event, which culminated in a genocidal effort to oust the Tamil people totally from the island on racial lines.
Yes, so this is the map in the 2007 to 2009 clearing of the last held territory by the Tigers. So these arrows are the army forces, divisions, where they went, and in the end, they will go to this northwestern corner called Muliwaikai. And the last place is called Muliwaikai. So Ravisa is saying Muliwaikai 2009. This is so all the people who were living in that, where the earlier map showed the arrows, were all cornered to this narrow strip of the coast in Mulativ, and they to the place called Muliwaikai, and bombarded and massacred. This is last year. So army just covered up with the sand, but the remains are coming. This is underwear of a lady, and this when they did the water laid water line underground. They dug and they saw this remaining of the people. This is one of the very few memorial that's left of Muliwaikai. So when Ravi Sa says Muliwaikai, that's this experience, the very last and worst massacre. Okay, other questions?
That it is not a popularly known genocide as we would know in Rwanda or in other places, because it is interlinked, as she indicated, as minority issue, then mixed with the fact the world understood that it is some problem of the Tamils who were transported from India during the colonial era and working in the tea estate because the popularity of the teas. They never understood that there was a group of ethnic Tamils who were living as independent nation in the northern east of the country until the British or the colonials came to the country, who, for their convenience of administrations and taxation, annexed the place into one country. So the north and east were independent sovereign nations before colonialism. But when they left, they identified that as one nation, Sinhalese, as Sri Lanka or Ceylon, which became a member of the United Nations. So people understood that as a discrimination between a majority and minority living in the country, which is not so. So when British took most of the Tamils to the central country for employment, because that is their policy, they always use the minority against the majority so that minorities will always be loyal to them. So the Tamils moved to the central at the request of the authorities, and these people lived in most part of the countries, not always in the Northern East Territory. Now, these are the people who were targeted by the 1977 and 1983 organized riots to drive them out of their Sinhala areas and made destitute, because in 1983 the target was essentially to destroy the economic base of the Tamils among the Sinhala side, that is on the south. They were made destitute, so that's where we became involved, because some of these destitute people who have been living over hundreds and 150 years among the Sinhalese who were thrown out without anything had to be found a place to settle them. Therefore, we settled them on the border villages of the Tamil northern east, which the government did not like because they thought we were changing the demography of the Tamil people by taking away the Indian population, whom they were still keeping in servitude. Because these people are tied down to the estate, they cannot move out of the estate without an exit permit from that particular estate. They live in the line rooms provided by the estate. They cannot own a piece of land in that country, even if they are in a position to buy it on their own revenues. So it is basically a serfdom, even in the modern, and the estate can deal with their livelihood in any way they want, and with which the government does not support them. So we took them and settled them, and they felt comfortable to live an equal life on their own in the Tamil border villages. But after the 1988, the government soldiers came and threw all of them out, parked army vehicles, collected all of them, and transported them back to their estates. If you remember the Polish, when Germany invaded Poland, and how they came into the Poland and picked up all the people, the Jews, and transported them and took them away. That is what happened in 1988 to all the settlers whom we did in after the 1977 riots. After about their independent livelihood for about 20 years, they were picked up and sent back. We do not know what happened to them. So these are the genocidal tendencies that began to develop, which the world did not understand. And the second one is, which tried to see even the Tamil struggle as a minority struggle rather than a nation which lived as an independent nation prior to colonialism, trying to regain its independence or trying to regain its self-determination against an authoritative state. That's what. So what we were fighting was in two fronts. One, we wanted our sovereignty, which was taken away by the colonials, particularly British, returned to us. We are entitled to. Northern East is our land. We are entitled to our sovereignty there. Second, even if it is not so, in terms of the international law, we have a right of self-determination to be ruled in what way we want, live in what way we want. At least a vote, right? The Tamils today are spread all over the country, all over the world, and let them take a vote and see how do they want to live. On the contrary, the Sri Lankan government is thwart the existence of the mere existence of the Tamils in terms of two. On racial, the other one is the Buddhist Buddhist religion. It says Buddhist religion should have the supremacy, and it can go in anywhere and declare any area as a religious area by installing a Buddhist statue. It can even be brought by a hooligan. And once any attempt is made or protest is made that it should not be done, army is brought in to support that hooligan because he has the right of supremacy for Buddhism. So this is the growing tendencies of the genocide and what has happened, the actions that have happened seriously and that is going on, which need to gain the attention of a genocide in a new form in the modern world than what we are normally used to understand, like what happened in Germany to the Jews or what has happened to the Armenians by the Turkish or by in the Czechoslovakian regions by the Lodge. They are direct and purposely done, but this one was systematically done because in the commission which I participated, we brought out clear evidence of so many police officers and army officers who were directly involved in the violence, and the Sansani Commission itself recommended, named them, and identified prosecution should be launched. But what was the reaction by the government? It passed a legislation that any public servant involved in any violence in the 1977 or 83 is immune from prosecution. Now, that habit led to all the violences that were conducted right up to 2009, including the war crimes, which is identified by the UN Human Rights Council, but still the government is not prepared to identify them or take any action against them, clamoring and giving reasons and giving the fodder for continued genocide of the Tamil people.
One of the very special thing about what Ravisa read is his own narrative account of what happened to him and his family as well. So question in relation to that as well, if what
Security Council did not act so far. I don't know whether we are on the path to it, but it's a majority of the members there, and we will always get any resolution there vetoed by America, Russia, or China. About 3 months before, I worked very closely with Gareth Evans, the Foreign Minister of Australia, who was the architect of the uh, protection mechanism by nations. And I think he and Norway and some of the states proposed to the Security Council, wanted to go to the Security Council to implement the right to protection. Right. But unfortunately, because of the makeup of the Security Council in the United Nations, there was not enough votes for that action to be launched. It's one of the biggest failures of the United Nations. And I think people like Gareth Evans and others in South Africa, everybody condemned that it was a repeat that the United Nations have left down in the case of the South, like in South Sudan, and also like in the other African country named me, and that this was a miserable failure to save the lives of all those people who perished. I think there was acknowledgement by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in that, and he said effective mechanisms should be implemented and procedures implemented. Sri Lanka is still a test case, but the international politics, and now with America moving out of United Nations, and China, Russia's, India's eminence, and their political interest is not helping. Most of them, to some extent, most of them have died, and some of them have moved out, and we have lost communication. Say, all those people who was part of the Tamil refugee rehabilitation organizations or lawyers who worked with me have died, and some have moved away. They are not there. But uh, but what I pointed out was that anybody who took an active role in presenting evidences in the commission, their offices were targeted, including mine. Those were burnt to burn the originals and all their offices. So that means we have lost all those records. The one that I printed out and said is probably the only copy that I was able to retrieve um, to some extent. I don't think others have it. So I am the one who has been circulating that to anybody. That represents what Tamils did, that of what we made out of the 10,000 statements that we made. And Sinsoni recommended that all those 10,000 people who lost their property should be compensated. The government appointed a commission, but to this extent, I don't think any one of them got $1 in compensation. And they make sure you can say that because the Sinhalese mostly are Buddhist, they are compassionate, and they are very good people. Even if you visit the country, all are nice, and including the Tamils, everybody is nice because Tamils are Hindus, Sinhalese are Buddhist, and Buddhism arose from Hinduism. It's all okay. But it is that few politicians and these dominant elements, because of the power hunger, they use this and put one race or one people against. And that has now developed into genocidal proportions and all these atrocities and violence against one community, and it has lost and it is unable to find its belonging. Now that's what the thing is. And if you see in my memorandum, in the last paragraph, there are two things I will point out to you. One, although the political party demanded separation and the Sinhalese resisted the separation was the cause of the riots and their anger, as you would put it that way. But we were independent minded, not political minded, and we have said in that memorandum that Tamils always opposed separation and that we do not ask for separation in this memorandum. If I had to repeat it, in that memorandum, when we drafted it, the Tamil population has voted overwhelmingly for a demand of endorsing the demand of the Tamil separate state. We did not adopt that political stand. We as independent people, independent lawyers, took the stand before the commission that the Tamils never wanted separation and that we do not back that claim before that commission to give an independent view into the causes of what has happened. So we had the courage to put it before the Sinhalese people that it is not the demand for a separate state that led to this violence, but organized by certain groups interested in power. The second latter part, you will also see that we went in and said that the overwhelming people who were affected were assisted by Sinhalese people who are Buddhist and by compassionate, and we thank that all those people who have been saviors of this episode. So both were sad. The Tamils were thankful for whatever, and I am thankful to those gentlemen who were personally friendly with me as Buddhist coming out to provide some assistance to me to survive. Now, I was lucky to survive because of that. But as a Tamil, if I was found on the road or if my taxi was opened on that day, I would have been finished. My qualifications or my ability did not mean anything to those mobs. If the Al Jazeera video could be seen, you can see what happened. I will not be here. But since I reached home and I escaped because again, the two drivers were Sinhalese employed by me and they were loyal to me, I got saved. So there are enough incidents of that. But that my story is not the story of several others who perished, who lost their homes and everything. Now, so my target in 1983 was by the authorities because I was being investigated for detention by the intelligence, and they provide a report to the government that I be detained because of my activities with the Tamil Refugee Rehabilitation Organization, alleging that we were funding the Tamil militants. So I was going up and down to the intelligence division for statements, etc., for about over a week. When the 1983 riots happened, and I managed to escape, and then I went into the camp and I started running the 1983 refugee camps. So there was a little tense and reluctance in this sort of hunting for people like us, and using that situation, since there was a sponsorship and Australia opened a humanitarian program, I was able to quickly get out to Australia, from where since then I have been active in the Tamil cause. But that is not the story of the people who perished in 1987, mostly the Indian Tamils. In 1983, mostly the Tamil people who lived in the other areas, and the Jaffna and Tamils who were protected by the LTTE, and all of them were massacred by the armed forces in the from up to 2009 war. Brings up more evidences now. So my story, although it has those elements, is a fortunate one because of these things. But what we have to worry about and what we have to think about is those unfortunate ones who continue to pay the price. I'm actually in the car having returned to Sri Lanka now because there is at least no open violence. But if you ask me whether I would go back and return permanently, the events that have happened to me, the events I have witnessed, does not give me any confidence to go and live there. Because identity as a Tamil is still a problem in genocidal proportions in that country. But I did go down there because I do interact in relation to helping some of the affected people, and for which so far I do not have much involvement with the security forces, but that can happen anytime because they are there. But my position to some extent does help me in those activities now. But if you ask me whether I would stay there continuously for the balance of my life with my family, I would not do it. No, there is no education about the ethnic animosities or to educate the people of what they have done and in order to bring a reconciliation. On the contrary, all the evidence point out that the government itself is intended in justification of what has been done because it refuses to acknowledge the United Nations resolution that it holds an impartial inquiry into the events of the 2019 killings. It still refuses. United Nations have identified large amount of military officials who were responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity and asked the government to charge them and try them in terms of the local laws at least, but it refuses to accept that. And then thirdly, it continues to justify that the actions of the singular majority is a right of theirs because of their insistence that they have a duty to protect Buddhism in that country. Okay, I had never heard of Buddhism being so violent. They use all these things to justify what has been done. So there is no, like in South Africa, there is no intention to educate the people or get them out of it. And in Canada, declared Tamil incidents or Tamil genocide as a chapter to be taught in the Canadian schools, which the Sri Lankan government went to the extent of challenging right up to in the highest courts of Canada that that decision was wrong. But ultimately, they did not succeed. So Canada still teaches what happened to the Tamils as an example of genocide in that country, with which the Sri Lankans are very, very unhappy. And we try to teach or look at few these things in Australia, they are opposed to it. So their mindset is on justification rather than reconciliation. The populations have lived together interdependently, etc. Buddhism and Hinduism, religiously they follow. So compassion, compassionate, all those things mixed are there. When something is happening, a very conscious Buddhist will always try to stop it. But two aspects are important to be learned. One is that perpetrators are there, but the government does not take any actions to stop those perpetrators or to punish them. On the contrary, they are encouraged. And then the other one is the security forces are brought in simply with an anti-Tamil message, and the Tamils are to be controlled or the Tamils are to be destroyed. So their sole duty would be the protection of Buddhism, and the Sinhalese and the Tamils do not have a place. So there is an authoritative, orchestrated violence of elimination, and the perpetrators are not controlled. That's what I refer to the identification of perpetrators in the 1977 riots by the commission chief himself, but no one has been prosecuted so far. They have been indemnified. They have been done away. Subsequent 83, yes, done away. 2009, not any independent one, the United Nations Human Rights Councils identified and provided them names of the security forces who are involved in these atrocities, identified as crimes against humanity, crimes against compassion, crimes against war crimes, etc. But this government refuses to accept that report, refuses to do anything against them. That's a seriousness that we have to understand. Yeah. But that is, of course, against another religion, that is against the Muslims, but of course being perpetrated by a Buddhist majority. Yes, it's a similar situation because these are new phenomena of how genocide is evolving, but at least only in the case of the Israelites, it's the Palestinians. Recently, there was a report and acceptance that it is genocide. In the case of the Tamils, there are independent inquiries which have said that what happened is genocide, but there is no official recognition of a genocide by the United Nations Human Rights Council, or neither has it appointed any commission to inquire into it, like in the case of Myanmar situation. So this is where we have to push the world to realize these things, the new forms of genocide, to declare them and to take effective action. Otherwise, it will be perpetrated and we'll get lost in the international political squabbles, I suppose. The people in the world are not interested in knowing about other people's problems. They have their own problems. But a young kid like you from Japan must understand that Japan was the biggest donor for Sri Lanka since 1956, biggest donor for Sri Lanka for agricultural development and various other developments. But unknowingly or knowingly, they ignored all those donations were used to oppress the Tamils because they were poured into the armed forces. They were poured into so-called 4D development schemes to bring in the Sinhalese people and and to take over the lands of the vulnerable people, etc. So I think people like you, youngsters, will have to ask the Japanese government to see, understand, to get an account of how this money was spent to funnel a genocide up until 2009. So that will be the biggest turnaround in thinking in Japan itself as to how it sends out these donations without any checks and balances as to how it was used. That itself will be a great step forward and an understanding in Japan about what another Buddhist country is doing to another group of people. Will you do that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The judges are reasonably educated up to some time into about 1980s, but then they were politicized. But if it is a sensitive case, just like anything that touched upon the Tamils' rights, you can always expect that to be not done in your favor. Mm. So judiciary was good, but it has now become very politicized, and they now say that this new government is trying to reshape them, but I doubt. But in between a government state and in between a Sinhalese and a Tamil, the judiciary would always view and interpret law according to the Sinhala interpretation. Buddhism plays a big part. I do not know whether it is through the actions of the conscious and compassionate Buddhist, but the politicians and genocidal minded people are using Buddhism as the excuse to do these things. There again, as you said, there are perpetrating Buddhists who are identified with these genocidal tendencies, and there are other priests who are educated and compassionate, but unfortunately, they are not in a position to highlight anything. or do any action simply because these belligerent Buddhists have the support of the authorities.
So thank you so much for reading the text. I wanted to have your voice heard.
Uh, Thank you for your background report, and thank you for everyone to accommodate me. And I hope it has been of benefit to everyone.